There we go. Hi everyone, it's Artie from the Human Chapters. I'll tell you a little bit about the Human Chapters. Humans are living narratives with the past, present, and future. These narratives constitute of a number of chapters across the lifespan. The aim of these conversations is to highlight a chapter of the narrative and unpack its connections to other chapters. I don't care whether people are natural storytellers, but I truly do believe that each person has a story to tell. Our acknowledgement to country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land which now comprises Greater Shepparton. We pay respect to their tribal elders, past and present and emerging. We celebrate their continuing culture and we acknowledge the memory of their ancestors. And today we are going to have a conversation with Hilderbrand, and this is going to be based on education. So I'll pass it on to Hildebrand to introduce himself. Go for it.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. I'm so happy to be a part of Human Chapters. I'm Hilderbrand Pelzer III. Feel free to call me Hildebrand. I'm an educator for 30 years now, 31 in fact, 31 years. I come from a family of educators. My mom and dad are both retired educators. My mom is a retired principal. My dad is a retired guidance counselor. And I have a brother who works in higher education. And so education has been a big part of my life. However, I did not think as a young person that I would be pursuing a career in education. And so over the years, I've been a teacher, an assistant principal, a principal, and also an assistant regional superintendent. But when I came out of high school, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. And I eventually went to college and studied physical education. And as a physical educator, I coached, I taught, and I also went back to school for sports management because I wanted to pursue a career as a athletic director or work for a professional sports team or something like that, a head coach. But I started working inside of a juvenile correctional facility in Pennsylvania for juvenile boys from all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And as I was building relationships with them and coaching them and working with them, I saw them as very talented, athletic, confident young men who went down the wrong path in life. But on days that I had the opportunity to assist the assistant principal in operating the school, I saw those same students in the classroom setting. And I saw that they could not read or write or count or even write their names or tell you their date of birth because they didn't have number skills and those type of things. And that depressed me, but it also inspired me to change my career path from sports management and physical education to education administration. And I've never looked back since. So that's how my journey starts in education.
Beautiful. Tell us a little bit more about when you were working in the correctional facility and you came across low literacy levels for these young humans. What was it like when you discovered? Okay, first of all, was there a discovery that took place, which was low literacy levels? Is there a link between low literacy and where they were at that particular point? And when you made the discovery, were you able to actually let them know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So discovery was, again, having the opportunity. So on days that the principal was away from the school building and the assistant principal would take over, again, he would often ask me to work with him and assist him. And I basically walked around the school building, made certain that things were okay. I wasn't really doing any heavy instructional supervision work, but really just problem solving because it was a correctional facility, making sure things were safe. But I would also walk in and out of classrooms. And so I didn't think anything of it initially, but I would always see the same students who in the physical education and athletic space, again, were talented, athletic, vocal, those type of things, bold, confident, they would have their heads down, or they would be trying to avoid or get out the room or not participating. And so as I started talking to teachers, classroom teachers, I started to learn more and more about their academic backgrounds and their writing skills and their literacy skills. And so that's how I started to see this. And then as I had more opportunities to visit those classrooms and even work with those teachers, I started to see student work. And I saw that students who were 14, 15, 16 years old couldn't tell you the relationships between letters and sounds. They couldn't, when you're little, you learn how to count to 10 and count to 20 and count to 30. They couldn't do things like that. So they couldn't tell you their date of birth. They couldn't write their own names. And so that's how I was exposed to it. So I didn't get into advocating or having a strong interest in reading. I'm not a reading teacher. I'm not a reading specialist, but I saw something that you asked, is it linked to incarceration? Over the years, more and more, I see students who are incarcerated, the commonality, the common thread, the common trend is that their literacy skills are third grade or below. And so I've seen that over the years. And that was in the early part of my career. In the middle part of my career, I worked inside of the Philadelphia prison system. And I was the principal inside the Philadelphia prison system for both juveniles who were being tried as adults and adults. And I saw the same thing. They could not read.
Okay. That's interesting. And so when you worked with the students themselves, did they actually say that it's, I don't know, what were their thoughts on literacy at that point?
So they tried. So one of the things the principal would teach us as teachers was to not be overly critical of their work. And so they made effort, right? And so, for example, if they were doing some writing assignments, they would write.
Yeah.
A lot of times the writing would be hard to follow. They wouldn't use periods or capital letters, run on sentences, that type of thing. But the principal taught us, the teachers, to see deeper and see what skills they needed help with, but don't be so critical in trying to mark up their paper or, red marks, do this over again, that type of thing. But look at it in such a way that we could glean some feedback and idea of where they needed help, and then inform our instruction to do that. Now, I was a physical educator, but I began working along with my colleagues in looking at ways that I could also do those kind of supportive initiatives in the physical education area as well. And so the work that they presented, tremendous effort, right? But you could see, to be 15, 16, and 17, they were struggling and had been struggling for years. And many of them had been incarcerated at that young age 2 and 3 times. So they had fell out of love with school. They were not interested in school. They found other things to be successful in, because in school they had fell behind their peers. They were embarrassed. They would get in trouble. And so the school dealt with them from a behavior standpoint and not from a reading standpoint.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you brought up. Behavior is something you can see, you can hear, you can tell when a
Yeah,
child appears naughty, or
yeah,
we
yeah,
place a lot of labels on them,
yeah.
but rarely do we try to get to the root of the problem of that
That's
behavior.
right. What I try to do, and a lot of when I go out and present or speak, um, is look at the school. I look at the school to prison pipeline from reading.
Yeah.
So oftentimes articles, journals, research, studies look at it from discipline, expulsion, suspensions, behavioral health management, all of those type of things, because as you just said, you can see that and it's disruptive and it's happening in the school environment. And so the child must be dealt with. Consequences must come behind that. But the fact is, when you look at it and unpeel it back, it's reading. It's the low literacy. And as I said, they fall out of love with school. So they try to avoid. So they may be in the classroom being disruptive when it's reading time. You may hear parents say, when I start working with my child at home with reading, he gets frustrated. You know, a child may walk out of the classroom or make a distraction when it's reading time. All of those things are signs that there's a reading issue. And if addressed, the child gets the help they need. If not addressed, day after day after day after day, the child then becomes a discipline problem. And we deal with it that way. And that involves police, that involves other factors, but we never look at it from reading. And so when I look at incarcerated youth, that was the common thread for me. And so I try to tap in from that perspective.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think within the speech and language pathology world, we have people with language disorders or that are not frequently identified. So language and literacy going hand in hand, and they're also at risk of that school to prison pipeline.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
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 it really is that marriage between the two. Um,
absolutely.
and for people that they're not familiar of the phrase school to prison pipeline, Hildebrand, could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a overused term, quite frankly. And what folks are saying is, when they say school to prison pipeline, they're saying how too often children are going to jail from school incidents. And again, it's surrounded around behaviors and discipline and involvement of the police. So when kids do things wrong, how do you hold them accountable? Some folks hold them accountable by restorative practices, building relationships with kids, trying to model for them the successes and ways they should behave. Those will be the right things to do. Having diversion opportunities where you can get kids involved in sports and other things. But so often we don't attempt to um, make those connections with kids. And schools, unfortunately, have student codes of conduct. And so you can be suspended for certain acts, behaviors. The more you get suspended, you know, you have a record now. If the issue involves police, you could be arrested. And so while all of those type of activities are happening in schools, it's linked to a pipeline to prison, because ultimately you get caught up into the juvenile justice system, not coming to school, cutting class, getting in fights. And again, we use that term school to prison pipeline because we see children going from school, dropping out of school, getting involved with crime, and eventually ending up in jail. And as I said, like the young people earlier in my early career, they had been incarcerated 2 and 3 times at the age of 14 and 15.
Thanks. Yeah, no, thank you for that. So, what was your next step after being a physical educator?
So my career, after being a physical educator at a correctional facility, I then moved into the district schools in the Pennsylvania area. Became a physical education teacher. I continued on after leaving the correctional facility. So I was in a traditional school setting now. And then I became a principal in the year an assistant principal after that in the year 1997 to 2000. And then I became a principal. And then in about 2008, 2011, I became a assistant regional superintendent for alternative education. And so I continued to work with students who had either dropped out, disengaged, were expelled, correctional facilities, and those type of settings. And then I went back into a principal role at a school for students who were permanently expelled. Mm-hmm. And then eventually to an elementary school where I've been able to make a real connection between early literacy and incarceration, because in the elementary school setting, I saw where teachers struggle with teaching reading, mm-hmm. teachers struggle with phonics and phonics, phonemic awareness. And I also struggled because as the principal, in order to coach and model, you have to know some things. And so I had to train myself up in order to help train teachers up. And so that we look at our teaching practices, we look at how we're assessing kids and using that information. We look at the curriculum resources we're using. We look at our professional development. We look at the student work. We progress monitor. But more importantly, how we communicate with parents about the progress or lack of progress that the child is making and what we're going to do about it. And so the elementary setting, you see where folks struggle with teaching reading, and that linkage can, if not corrected, can be devastating for kids.
Absolutely. And to have the opportunity to perhaps connect with the kids at this age and knowing the knowledge you do have and the experiences you do have, that's a significant, I can see the impact.
What I do is my experiences, when I move around the school building or in classes or work with parents or work with kids or work with teachers, I'm always carrying my knowledge and experience with incarcerated youth, because I can see if this child does not learn his letters and sounds and continues to go to the second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade without those skills, that's going to have devastating consequences, or it could. And so I engage with school activities with that in mind all the time. And so a lot of folks, they know my background, but they don't know it to the extent that others may know it. And so like a new teacher wouldn't know it necessarily, but the things that I say to a new teacher, will resonate later, right? But they don't really understand why I'm saying it right now because of my experiences. But veteran teachers who have worked with me for a while understand the vision, the mission, and the why that I do or say certain things.
Absolutely. And how do you so say a new teacher comes into school and they're there for 1 year or 2 years, and we know these years matter for every single child. And there is a sense of urgency to start doing things, I suppose, correctly or to meet the child's needs from the very beginning, right? Without trying to lose time. How do you balance your conversations, knowing what you know, but also giving the teacher the benefit of the doubt, or just finding their own feet?
Yeah. It's difficult. It's challenging as a veteran, right? It's challenging, but I understand it. That the more experience in this profession I have, you always find yourself starting over sometimes because you have new teachers. So every time you get new teachers, then you're retraining, developing again, versus having teachers who you've built capacity with, and they may not need as much support as someone who is new. And so with new teachers, we really focus on one, retention, right? And getting them to understand the challenges that they will face in a school, particularly with reading and behavior if the reading is not addressed, and getting the teacher to understand that they have the power to do something about it. And the power to do something about it is within their planning, within how they build relationships, how they manage their class, the training that they, consume and use, um, working with colleagues who may have some best practices and ideas. So I guess what I'm saying is that they have to have that commitment. Now, if they don't have that commitment and grit, I've seen teachers who quit, after a few months, after 1 year, because of the challenges and not understanding the challenges. But then the other thing is our universities. Our universities, some are doing an outstanding job with trying to focus on the science of reading and teaching their aspiring teachers the necessary skills they need to, on day one, be able to implement and teach reading. But then there are still some universities that are not doing a good job. And so new teachers are coming out without those skills in understanding of the science of reading, or even understanding the 5 components of reading and what that looks like when they plan. And so, if you assess a kid and the kid skips a word or something like that, and the teacher, if you might be assessing for fluency or something like that, and you go back and you ask the teacher, well, when you saw the child do that, what did you take from that? And sometimes they may not know. They just know he just skipped the word. Maybe he couldn't sound it out. Maybe he didn't know the letters. But that disconnect, you always find yourself, where I do, trying to train in those areas.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. And having the knowledge you have, and hindsight is a powerful thing. Do you see similarities between the education system now and perhaps when you were actually growing up and being educated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I see similarities here and there. When I was in school, and it was a long time ago, I just saw, it just seemed like it was, if you look at graduating classes, it just seemed like more kids were graduating than now. I graduated from a school, it was almost 550 of us that graduated in our class. And now that same school that I went to high school, they don't have that type of number. And so I look at what happened to the kids, what's happening in our communities, what's happening in neighborhoods, that there's a drop in graduation, right? Just from that standpoint. And when you unpack that a little bit, you find that kids nowadays are falling out of love or relationships with school. When I was in school, there were some great teachers you had great, strong relationships with, coaches and friends. And it just seems now, we talk about similarities, it just seems like today, maybe it's because of technology or different things. We didn't have technology back then. You had to talk to people. You had to interact with people. There was always some athletic programs to be a part of. The recreation centers were open. There were just great people who took care of us. Nowadays, I see loosely, sometimes dysfunctional families, kids taking care of themselves, feeding themselves, kindergarten kids walking themselves to school by themselves. It's a lot different now. Children not wearing, when it's very cold outside, not having winter coats, not having sweaters, hats, and hoods. So I see a true disconnect from when I was in school to now, which tells me that from a social standpoint, there are some things wrong with our society.
Yeah. Plenty of social issues to consider as well. And it just makes us, I suppose it gets us to think how complex a child's life actually is at school within the learning capacity, but then outside of school as well, and having extraneous factors.
Just little things like tying your shoes, learning how to zip, like the fine motor skills of kids, zipping up your jacket, button your shirt. I see they're unable to do that. So we're talking about literacy, right? in that dynamic. But when you just look at it from fine motor skills and things like that, I remember being taught those things. I remember my brother teaching me how to tie my shoes. I remember my brother teaching me how to ride a bike. You might button your shirt wrong one time, right? But then you learn the coordination or the zip. And now schools are doing that work now, because you see kids coming to school, shoes on the wrong feet, that type of thing. Is small things that don't get a lot of publicity, but if you really watch kids and really in tune with struggles, you see, wow, how did he come out the house like that? And his mom or parent brought him to school. And so it's just different. So there are some similarities in terms of curriculum and operations of schools and activities. It might be more when I was in school and less now. But what I see more is this social society concerns. Let me just share this. I'm in the Philadelphia area, and they have a new juvenile justice system there, a brand new juvenile justice system, for families and children in who are in court for all types of offenses, and sometimes the young people are adjudicated and they may go to jail. But years ago, this building was in a different location. And the location that it was in, it was right next to the city's main free library. And the buildings, from an architectural standpoint, were the same identical building. So if you looked at it from afar, you would see the same buildings. Unless you were from the city, you knew that's the juvenile justice center, family court, and that's the library. But if you weren't from the city, you wouldn't know. But the family court and juvenile justice system used to have lines all from the door all the way wrapped around the corner. And the library wouldn't have anybody going in there. It wouldn't have any lines. And so when I talk about social and society, like, it was more families and children going to court in the library. It was more families, involved with court intervention than literacy. It was just profound to me when and that was one of the things that being involved with incarcerated youth and having to visit that facility sometimes to testify or to speak on behalf of a child or something like that. It always fascinated me that something is wrong here, that the court line is wrapped around long, people waiting, rain, sun, snow, shine, but the library, no one. That's the difference. That's the link between literacy and incarceration.
And that paints a very clear picture of what we're seeing these days. Whether we acknowledge it or not, that's a different case, but actually what's happening. So thank you for sharing that. This is just, it's probably a left field question. What are dinner time conversations like with your own family, but also your, I suppose, your parents and your brother and sister or your siblings? You said they're all in education.
Yes. So my mom and dad are both retired now. Mom was a principal and dad was a guidance counselor. And so when we are together, and I hope we can get together again in better times, but when we're together, we talk about a lot of things. We do talk about education. We do talk about, to your point, some similarities of when they were working and teachers and that type of thing to what we see now. But we also talk a lot about civics. We talk a lot about what's happening in cities and across the country. We talk about devastation in communities, crime, waking up every day, You cut on the news and there are some shootings, and most times children or young people are involved in that, either being shot or killed or participating in it. Like every day you wake up and there's something on the news like that. And so we talk about what's happening in politics, direction of the country. We have some rich conversations, not only with my parents, but even my wife and daughter. We have conversations. My daughter, she's grown now, really. So her voice is really interesting to hear, because she gets to share a different perspective of things. But we always have these conversations. We just want to see better quality for people. Issues around healthcare, issues around, when we talk about COVID going on, like hospitals and nurses being overwhelmed, or there are no ICU units. And we're looking at these are hospitals that were like major staples of communities. The way New York was devastated, or the way California is devastated now. These are some of the largest states in the United States. And just to see the devastation just says a lot about where we are. People not eating, people losing their jobs, all of those type of things. So we talk about that all the time, just to try to put it in some perspective and understand it. But try not to be too consumed with it, because the news can just depress you a lot. And so we have those conversations, and we enjoy it. And then we also have game night, where we stop and we play games, Scrabble, Uno, and other things as well.
Beautiful. And Hildebrand, so the next question is going to be about some of the books you've written.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit.
So I've only written one book.
Yeah.
It's somewhere around here. Oh, here it is. Unlocking Potential.
Okay.
And so, but I write articles. So I have a blog, but I also have written for the Philadelphia Citizen. And so if anyone wants to read my articles, you can go to my website or go to the Philadelphia Citizen, and you'll see my articles that I've written about educational topics. But I wrote this book for two reasons. One, I started out in juvenile and working with incarcerated youth, and then transitioned into school districts and traditional schools. And one of my schools was also in the Philadelphia prison system, because there were juveniles who the school district was still responsible for. And so one reason for writing a book is because when people ask me, who knew I was a principal, well, what school are you? Philadelphia prison system. I would always get this look of shock. Like, how could you work in a correctional setting? And so it was hard to tell folks that I'm doing good work in this correctional setting. I'm providing and leading a school in this correctional setting. But also in the correctional setting, there are other good people, social workers, doctors, volunteers, faith-based counselors, right? And so there are other good people who are working with incarcerated individuals to make their life in their correctional community better. And so it was tough telling people that, because when you think about correctional facility or prison or jail, those terminologies just turn people off.
Yeah.
And so that was one reason for writing a book, to give people some insight. But then two, I wrote the book, I got an award, maybe one of many, but this one was for the Council of Great City Schools, which is a national education organization that represents urban districts all across the country, about 70. And I received the Queen Smith Award. And it was for urban education commitment. And I went, received my award. I went to Houston, Texas, and I spoke. I presented at that ceremony. And afterwards, the audience was filled with people who lead schools, superintendents, district officials, school board members, you name it. And after I spoke, I'm thinking I'm just going to shake some hands and go on about my way. But they lined up to speak to me. And what they said was that they had never even considered, to the extent I was speaking about it, their own students in their own school districts who may be incarcerated. And so that's a disconnect, that school districts are not even aware of the kids who have fell out of love with school because of reading and other things. We talk about the school to prison pipeline, but we talk about it when they get to prison, we forget about it. We forget about them. And so that was the second reason I said, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and write the book. I'm gonna go ahead and write the book because more people need to know about the correctional side and what's happening. And so those were the two reasons why I wrote the book.
That's amazing. And have people, so you've said when you talk about it, people have connected with it, and I suppose made the personal connection of their school, their community. Have you heard about any other messages of feedback of how it's impacted other people?
Yeah, I think I did it. It's interesting because I've gone as far as London to speak.
Yeah, wow.
And when I went to London, I spoke about special education inside of prisons, right? But I've spoken in different venues. But I also did a TED talk, and for some reason, the TED talk, which was really part leadership story and part experience, my real experience in a correctional setting, and the things that I experienced and saw. After the TED talk, it seemed like what connected with people was the literacy.
Yeah.
Now, I always talk about the literacy, but again, I think the TED talk helped folks see the connection and not just see jail.
Yeah.
But I always tell people my book is not about jail. It's not about prison. It's about education. And so the TED talk allowed me to more people to hear and see, and they made the connection. So this folks who advocate for dyslexia made a connection. Folks who really live in the early literacy space made a connection. Parents who always say their child or the school is not helping them with reading made a connection. And so I got these many connections as a result of that TED talk. And so I was always talking about it, but that platform allowed people to actually hear the connection between low literacy and incarceration and the likelihood that a child will go to jail if that is not corrected.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. I'm still waiting for my copy in the mail, actually, of Unlocking
Oh,
Potential. Yes, yes. So thank you for that.
yes.
So I suppose I'll read this question. So during your chapter, you've experienced significant accomplishments. What has been a direct one or two or three direct impact on you, but your family as well?
So, wow, accomplishments, um, there are a couple that stay with me. And anything that I do, I always try to keep my wife and daughter, my family in tune with what I'm doing so they understand why I may be busy or why I need to work on a project or something like that, and how important it is to me. But over the years, there are probably two or three things that really stand out that I'm proud of and I think made an impact on young people. And one definitely was working inside the Philadelphia prison system. when I got to the Philadelphia prison system, I had been a principal for several years and at a large high school and a small high school. But in the Philadelphia prison system, it probably provided my best leadership opportunity and experience because you had to navigate corrections, security, incarceration, logistics, people who truly, it was all about security, not rehabilitation. And so being able to organize a school for juveniles in that setting, which was across 2 facilities and then eventually 3 facilities, was something that I always tell the team when I see them. I don't see them as much now. I'm very proud that we were able to help some incarcerated young men and women get on track with their education and complete their diplomas while they were incarcerated. And we built up a more academic, stable, consistent program, involved training, articulation across the correctional facilities. We worked with the wardens and the commissioners and all of that. And that was phenomenal. But 2, when I was an assistant regional superintendent, there were students who were expelled from school. So when you talk about the school to prison pipeline, one of the extremes in that pipeline is students who, after being suspended, disciplined, you name it, at some point the school district expelled them permanently from school. And their parents then had to find a different school for them. If their parents could not find a school for them within 30 days, according to the law, the home school district had to provide a school for them. But the school district, these kids were not welcomed back into their previous schools. And so the superintendent of schools asked me and some other folks to develop 2 high schools for students who were permanently expelled. And I had the opportunity to create 2 high schools for students. And they, you know, one was on one side of the city, the other was on the other side of the city, so that children who lived in those parts of the city could get access. Now, behind the scenes, that means working with the state, working with the various offices, finding property and location, hiring teachers, all of that kind of stuff went into this. But being able to open up those 2 schools was something that, and there's still schools in place today. The mission is a little different today than what it was back then, but those 2 schools still had the same names, and anyone who knows anything about them will know why they were founded and started. And that's something that I'm very proud of too. Yeah, so those 2 things. And then lastly would be working in the elementary setting, because I also learned a lot. Again, by trade, I'm a physical educator who became a principal. But I didn't have any training in reading. I'm not a reading specialist. You know, I learned by professional development or reading or engaging in conversations with folks and learning that type of way. But I have also been a part of, because of not knowing, probably hurting kids in terms of their literacy, right? And so to see that I could be a part of that too, because my knowledge base was not strong, I knew I had to do something about it, and I had to help teachers. And now, I won't say I'm an expert in reading or anything like that, but I know more about it now that my voice is helping others change their practices. And so I still struggle with that, but I know what it should look like, feel like, to see kids being literate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you on that point, Hildebrand. So I also work in schools, but as a speech and language pathologist. And I started working in schools in 2016, but not having a lot of knowledge on acquisition of reading skills. We had we had great training on like the pre-literacy skills, so your phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, but the direct link to phonics and everything that comes after that. It's still a learning journey every day, but within, I think, in less than 5 years, to go, oh wow, lots of other kids that have been on the caseload would have benefited from this kind of intervention, still look back to it today. And that's in a relatively short span, right? Like 5 years isn't, but it is in, yeah, a different context to go, how many other kids would have, yeah, benefited from the knowledge?
Yeah, you
Uh,
know,
yeah.
and that's a great point. You're right. Looking at um, looking at this from a special education lens,
Mm,
um, so often you have parents, and I get them too, that they tell you, "Hey, my child, I don't think my child can read." In the school, we have a plan, a multi-tiered support process
mm,
to work with the child, progress monitor, meet with the parents, all those kind of things, target instructional supports. But so often parents are asking for special education. And so when I speak with psychologists and we look at where are we doing some things wrong, and we look at permissions to evaluate or reasons why people want to have their child evaluate, it always comes back to reading.
mm,
And I remember one of the psychologists one day that I was talking to, she said, what if teachers could just teach decoding,
mm,
right? What she was saying is, if our teachers are struggling with reading, then parents are looking for help. And so most of the times, if they don't see that they're getting any help, they say, oh, I want special education. If we could help them, that's what she was saying. If we could teach the coding, if teachers understood, had a stronger capacity with phonics and
mm,
phonemic awareness, and what to do when they see that those are the skills that the child needs,
yeah,
you know, what does fluency really look like, and what does vocabulary development really look like? Not just memorizing words, but does that child know those letters in those words, the syllables in those words? If they see those words in a fluency assessment, they can read those words.
mm,
And so teachers struggle with that. And so when that psychologist said that, it was brief, but it was profound.
mm,
That it said we have to get back to helping our teachers who struggle with teaching reading. you know
absolutely.
and folks just have to move beyond their vulnerabilities. It's a tough conversation. I had to do it. So when I have conversations with teachers about reading, they want to um, give me the impression that they know, but the data may say something else. And so you got to not make it personal and just say, okay, well, let's look at this child's work. What do we see here? What are some of the things we need to do? And what support do you need from me to do this? And let's put a timeline and some measurable goals behind it. And we can help kids, but folks have to be willing to say, I need to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's it goes along, or it aligns well with being a student for life, right? To acknowledge
Yes,
where the gaps are, but not
yes,
punishing yourself for it, just, yeah, acknowledging and moving
yes.
forward. Before I wrap up with the final question, is there anything I've missed, not touched upon, something you wanted to share that, yeah.
No, I'm just excited that when you reached out and you shared some of your links, and I also went to the Facebook and I saw some of your previous um, videos of other folks. I said, wow. I said, this human chapter, really giving folks a platform to share their experience with others, right? So often folks don't get that chance to share their experience or their journey or their leadership story. Folks may, I've done interviews and things like that, and folks, interviews are typically for a specific purpose,
Yeah.
specific information. But this is more like conversational and really gets me to be reflective, with the questions and then think about, wow, yeah, I did those things. Like you asked about the accomplishments. Sometimes I forget about those things, because you move on with new challenges. But when you sit back and reflect, it's like, wow, there was some work that was done in my human chapter
Yeah.
that really helped some folks, help teachers, help parents, help kids. And now, so this platform and being able to speak to you, I just want to say thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for, taking the time and sharing your experiences, your knowledge. It's been fantastic. So the final question is, what would your vision be for a utopic world? And like key takeaways.
So it would stem around just learning, you
Mhm.
know. I think so here in the United States anyway, um, clearly folks are not all on the same page about how to handle differences. You know, agreeing to disagree doesn't seem like it has a place anymore. You know, people are disagreeing to disagree and then being punitive about the disagreement. And so that collaboration spirit of citizenship, um, problem solving, really trying to help folks who need help, just seems like it's missing. And so if I had my way, I would want to look at ways and policies where we're helping more of our needy. We're
Mm.
helping more people who are struggling families. We're doing something to make certain that more quality education is put in front of folks, accessible higher education opportunities, whether that be community schools or college. We talk about student loan debts and all the things that prevent someone from moving forward. I would just like to see those things get better. I would like to see, I guess what I'm saying is I want our discourse to not be so angry.
Mm.
Get back to that. I agree to disagree with you. And here's my reason. Here's your reason. And maybe we can come together on something. It just doesn't seem like that's in any way, shape, or form possible sometimes, at least over the past few years. And so I look forward to adding to the discourse by in those areas that I can work in. And I always tell my teachers and folks, from the school, from the education, and with the kids we have, we need to do what we know we can do and the power that we have to do it to help our kids and help our family and help our school communities. And we're adding to the positive discourse and positive change that society needs.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting being in the education world and being able to transparently see the similarities, the differences, but also the dangers
Yeah.
moving forward. It's, having conversations with society as such. So people that are not necessarily working in education, however, there's
Yeah.
still there is still that connection that should be there. This discourse could be so
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. Folks don't talk about education, you know, enough,
Yeah.
it's not even when folks are running for public office and things like that, they don't always talk about education in a positive way, right? It's always, if they are talking about it, may be negative, right? But what are the positives that can be built upon? So whether that's early literacy, whether that's high school, college, continuing education, I think education is that connection to all of us if we do it right, all of us.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. Everyone is linked to education somehow, whether you've been in the field. At the end of the day,
That's right.
you are likely to have been a student at some point.
That's right.
Or,
All of us.
yeah,
That's the common thing. We might have different careers,
right.
live in different places, but everyone should have went to school, that, and had that experience in a classroom with a teacher, making friends, being a part of school activities, learning, getting grades, graduating, getting promoted. Everyone should have that experience.
That's right. Thank you so much for taking the time out to have this conversation.
Thank you.
I'll stop recording now, but